Bam! MC is in the house. What's up, folks? My name is Justin Garcia, also known as Master Chim, and welcome to the Warrior Stream. I am here every Wednesday at noon Eastern Standard Time, taking a topic, deep dive, and having a good time while doing it. Got a good topic planned today. Before we get into that, let's take care of the housekeeping. And let me say what's up to some of you guys I see. All right. Somebody changed their name. Studio Array Music. Awesome. Good afternoon to you. Johnny Groove. What's going on, brother man? Good to see you. Aaron, what's up, darling? Good to see you. All right. A lot of the regular followers. Make sure you guys say what's up. You know, there's always like a 15 to 20 person like regular that jumps right on, watches for a bunch. Not everybody says what's up. Don't be shy here, unless like you're watching this instead of like being somewhere you're supposed to be. In which case, like, yeah, you got to sort that out on your own. But let's get into what do we got here. We got my man Jamie. What's up, brother man? Good to see you. The topic today. No, I keep saying we're gonna do the housekeeping before the topic. All right, focus, Justin. Jesus Christ. So, if you guys are not getting my email every morning. Number one, I guarantee you they're more organized than the beginning of this live stream. MasterChimLetter.com. If you go there, it will tell you it's in the corner. Or is it here? It's here if you're watching on a desktop. It's here if you're watching on a mobile in a vertical aspect ratio. The streaming software I use just got an upgrade, so it tries to make the aspect ratio specific to how you're watching it. So regardless, MasterChimLetter.com gets you the email. So it gets you on the email list. It's free. I send it every morning. A lot of times the topic of the email itself will resonate with the people who are interested in my stuff. But even those times where maybe it's a little bit of offset, you know, I'm talking about fatherhood and somebody doesn't have children as an example. There's always the quote of the day. And the quote of the day, I put a lot of time and effort into really trying to sort of polish a quote. A lot of those quotes of the day, if you haven't noticed, those are the ones that wind up becoming the sort of memes and posts that I make on my social media platforms. So definitely worth checking it out. John Wiley, what's up, brother man? So I had a pretty spirited mastermind call this morning with my inner circle members, and I don't want to completely lose my voice. So I'm going to talk a little bit more persuasively, a little bit more intimately, if you will. And Yarn Saxon, what's up, Don? Good to see you. And we're going to start getting into today's topic. So whenever I'm designing one of these, you know, there's a couple of different boxes I have to check, a couple of different hoops I have to jump through maybe. I need to think of an idea that's going to be valuable to the people that watch my stuff. I have to codify that idea. Once I choose an idea, I have to sort of codify it. Well, what does that look like? I usually opt for lists. You guys know that because this is a huge just time save when it comes like I don't do well on scripts to begin with. I mean, if that isn't obvious, why I wouldn't be good at scripting? I don't know what to tell you. But I do perform very well with frames. So I use a frame. So I have to pick a topic. I have to design a frame, an outline for what that is. Usually I do that in the form of a list. Then I have to think of a sort of compelling, attractive headline for the video. I then have to create an email that drives people to this show. And then I have to make sure that the list that I go over, number one, is framed in a compelling way, which means I have to have interesting, you know, components of the list. I have to name them something interesting. And then obviously at the end of all that, I've got to do what I do, which ironically enough is the easiest out of all these things. So in other words, getting to this point right now takes the most labor, But from here on in, we usually tend to have fun. And this is what I love doing. Similar to what I did this morning in my mastermind group, which is why I'm losing my fucking voice. So we do have a list. I did show a little bit of responsibility in posting those individual things on the list on the streaming software. So I have those locked and loaded. But the list we're going to go over is based on this title of how good men turn bitter, resentful, and numb. Words being what they are, it's worth breaking down what those terms mean. When I say good men, and again, there's usually a difference between the person who's been following me for a while and the person who's maybe just been introduced to me. When I say good, when I say any term really, there's a context to be implied. And sometimes if you're not aware of that context, we wind up having two different conversations while thinking we're having one. When I say good, it means somebody who is effective at pursuing mission and creating outcomes. It is somebody who acts morally. If we start deciding what morality is and what one's morals are, I am not of the belief that there is some universal snapshot of what morality is supposed to be. I don't think it is very useful to think that way if we're actually trying to help an individual, because then it becomes a process of compliance rather than discovery, let alone persuasion and influence, right? If I tell you what morality is, then I'm going to make sure that you follow it. But if I'm trying to figure out what your morality is, it's a different exchange, right? It's a different dynamic between us. So when I say a good man, it's good for whatever purpose you have good as being. Now, obviously, there is some consistency, some overlap, some things we could generally expect in cultures, or in homogenous groups, or even we could say more specifically, Western countries. There are some things that we tend to agree on at a subconscious level. And good, a lot of times, will reflect that. But that's not always the case, so I don't want to be bound by that. So if I say good, it's what good is to you. Because whereas the morality may not be universal, the application of the term by that definition is good to you. So when good men turn bitter, so when I say bitter, a couple of different ways I could describe it. I don't want to spend too much time breaking down these because the connotation is usually, functionally overlapped enough. But bitter is when you are pessimistic. It's when you are the glass half empty type of person. It's when you are acting as if you are supposed to move forward as a reaction to what has happened backward, right? My future is sort of mandated by my past. Those are the characteristics of somebody who is bitter. They've been through some stuff. They see it as being an overall negative, unpleasant experience. And I would say the functional value of why we would not want to be bitter is because of all the things we don't have when we act that way, right? We don't have the optimism. I define hope as having an alliance with the future. So sometimes being hopeful is the energy that we need, and it might be the only energy source we have to keep moving. Bitterness goes against that, right? Resentful, right? So how good men turn bitter, resentful. Resentful is the paradox that so many people experience these days where they curse the values or the successes or the attributes even experienced or shown by other people, while at the same time coveting those very things. It's the guy who says, oh, please, you make a lot of money and then, everything is materialistic. You don't really worry about the right things. And while simultaneously, he's somebody who does not know how to make money. It is the Nietzschean, even though Peterson wants to take credit for it, it's the Nietzschean, laughing at people who consider themselves moral because they were born with no ability to be immoral. It's like you don't get credit for being peaceful if that is your only choice. And that's the thing with people who are resentful, they tend to present the circumstances under which they live as a choice. And they discredit, denigrate people who, under that facade, opted for different choices. Oh, yeah, I could have been rich, but then what? My life's all about money? Or like that's the type of narrative you'll hear from the resentful folk, right? And then finally, numb. I think numb is probably the easiest one to connect with. Numb is not a disconnection, right? Oh, maybe there is some juice behind this one too. If we're numb, it's not that we just don't feel things. That is the end result. But it is we are overstimulated to the point of not feeling it anymore. Right? So if you sit there and just keep rubbing your hand, you're feeling it. But after a while, the nerve endings become overstimulated in your hand. And what it felt like in the beginning isn't what it feels like now. And you wind up not feeling the specific sensation at all. You wind up feeling just a general state. So numbness is certainly being disconnected to the sort of causal relationship or the engagement of the environment. But really, it's a product of being overstimulated and it being overwhelming, right? Different application. Here we go. I'll make this tangent short, I promise. John Boyd's OODA loop, right? OODA, observe, orient, decide, act. The way that I often teach the OODA loop is to say that observe is to look at the entire map of our awareness, right? Little NLP, the map is not the territory, right? So reality exists outside of our map. But if we look at our map, that's the observe. And then it's orient. Where am I on that map, right? It's the where's Waldo. This whole thing going on, where am I? And then based on what is around, where I am in terms or in relation to what is around, what are my choices? Decide on one of them. That's the D in the OODA loop. And then finally, act. Well, sometimes when we are overwhelmed, either with what we are observing or our inability to find where we are in what we are observing, what we will do is we'll take that map and we'll decrease it in size. And we'll keep decreasing it in size until we could actually figure out where we are. And then from that point, maybe we build back up. An example of this that I've observed in martial arts, and I've shared this before, you have the individual who's sparring for the first time. And he has his hands up, his mouthpiece in, maybe his headgear on, and he's got somebody in front of him, and he's trying to do all those moves that he's been doing on the pads, all that time. And for some reason, it's different. And it's different because he's throwing those strikes on a different map. And he doesn't know where he's supposed to use those strikes here. So sometimes the thing that helps people eventually is you just tell them, go out and throw this combination. A buddy of mine, UFC champion, former UFC champion, Glover Teixeira, he had a fight years ago against this guy. I don't know his first name, but I know his last name is Sokoju. He was like this African judo guy. And it must have been what Glover was practicing with his camp prior to that fight. He and I had lost touch at that point. We had trained together much earlier in my career. But when I saw him in that fight, and you can go look for Glover versus Sokoju, he came out and just threw jab cross hook. He threw that over and over and over again. And eventually, heavy-handed motherfucker like he is, he found Sokoju's chin, and that was all she wrote. Well, the thing is, if you have somebody that's trying to sort of figure out what they should be doing, and they can't get that movement, sometimes just saying, well, I'm just going to do this. It simplifies things. Now, maybe the map doesn't appear to shrink in those circumstances, but that's exactly what it does because your decisions change, your choices change. So your decision is a lot faster, right? Hicks law, right? The more options you have, the slower you're going to be. So you reduce those options, it tends to make you a little bit more efficient. But in beginners with striking, something different happens. The guy gets hit. He's trying to swing. He's getting hit. And eventually he covers up. Now, he may still want to fight. He may still be game. But what he is doing in that situation is he is reducing that map to a size that's so small that he can orient himself again. When I teach guys in the beginning getting off the cage in a fight, sitting there and trying to slip and counter strike while guys are throwing stuff, yeah, you could get good enough to where that's happening. And a lot of that has to be installed subconsciously. So you're reacting and doing that, not necessarily making decisions. But sometimes in the beginning, I'll say, listen, cover up. And when you're ready, disconnecting it from the stimulus from the opponent or the reality in general, when you're ready, just step off to one side, throw an overhand, and then shoot, or throw an overhand, then circle out, whatever the case is. A step up from that is whenever he hits you with his right hand, answer with this combination. Whenever he throws with the left hand, answer with this combination. And that simplifies it to he throws that hand, I do this. He throws the other hand, I do that. And it sort of opens that map a little bit more. You go and watch Muhammad Ali against Foreman, the rope-a-dope, and you see him, there's spots where he's dodging, half a dozen to a dozen strikes while being on the rope. That's fucking snake charming. He's just, it's a reason they call him the greatest, even though I think a prime Mike Tyson would have put him unconscious. But that's another show. But the thing is, there is something to be said for the stimulus and how it overwhelms us, right? All that was to define numb. Geez, I didn't even get to the damn list yet. All right. Jamie, what did Jamie write here? Envy is how a lesser man admires. Yes, that's very good. I like it. So let's get to the list. And it is the top 7 ways a good man turns bitter, resentful, and numb. So let me bring up the first one here. So I have 7 ways. We're going to count down. We're going to start with number 7. Number 7, they carry more than they can say. So defining this list, I want you to just use the lens of each one of these things might be something you resonate with. It might be something that has absolutely nothing to do with you. But as we go down, one thing might hit, another thing might be something you don't identify with at all. It's not meant to be that this is how everybody sort of succumbs to this bitterness, resentfulness, or numbness. It's how we could sort of track our reactions to things that we're doing under the assumption that it will eventually lead to one of these unwanted outcomes, right? So number 7, they can carry more than they can say. A lot of times men, especially when they're excited, when they're motivated, when they're succumbing to peer pressure or they have insecurities about how they look to other people, they start piling responsibility on themselves. They start sort of carrying around a hell of a lot more weight than they usually do, than they're used to, or ultimately what they're built to carry. And because they do that, it's just a matter of time before the structure that's carrying it starts to crack. So what happens? Well, eventually you can't sustain that type of pace. There's an archetype of individual, right? I'm going to describe a composite, right? So if any of you guys that know me, that this resonates specifically with you, this is not you, but you might be a part of the guy I'm describing, right? So I like to do those composites because I don't want anybody thinking I'm just putting them on blast, unless I'm literally spotlighting and putting them on blast, right? So this archetype of individual is the guy who he wants to be approved of so badly that he will always say yes. But when he says yes, he thinks it's his duty. He thinks in order to sort of generate the respect that he wants from his people, he's supposed to say yes. Saying yes in his mind is the equivalent of being the guy he wants to be. The problem is, though, that we're not capable of doing everything. And we don't necessarily know that the person asking us to do something, even if they're an ally, has an understanding of exactly what our capacity and capabilities are. So they could innocently ask us to do something, have no idea that we're not capable of that, and ask it anyway. And part of the reason that they'll be free to ask it, despite knowing the entirety of the context of how it affects you, is they kind of assume you'll say no if you need to. But this archetype of guy that I'm talking about, he doesn't do that. So he says yes, he says yes, he says yes. And it's like, a car, a vehicle that you keep stacking things on, you put a tow hitch on it, it's towing a trailer. At some point, the engine's got to go. So remember, I talked about these things causing men to be bitter, resentful, or numb. Sometimes people break down without any of those things happening. Today, we're talking about the different type of guy. We're not talking about the guy that just collapses, the guy that, has a panic attack or a heart attack or just, winds up rejecting everything. We're talking about the guy that develops the sort of narrative or the coping mechanism to continue doing what they're doing, but now with a different story explaining the reason for it. So this is the guy that he offers help to somebody, and then he resents them for needing help, right? Hey, buddy, can you help me move this weekend? And the buddy, who's the archetype of the guy, says absolutely. And then he gets there and he's helping him move, and he's like, "Why doesn't this fucking guy hire movers? Why he didn't? Am I the only guy he called? This guy over here hasn't fucking lifted anything." It's like either you're helping or you're not, right? If you guys have ever seen my program Tree of Support, I talk about the different types of help. Most people want to help the way they want to help, not the way the help is actually needed. That's on the side, right? So number 7, they carry more than they can say. Number 6, they stop expecting anything from themselves. At first, you'll see men lower their standards. They'll stop doing the things that they've always done, the things that they've espoused a man's supposed to do, or they pride themselves on doing. And that stops. Their new standards then become their, what was Biden calling it, the new normal, right? This is how I do things now. Have you guys ever seen a restaurant where somebody, either it's the individual makes a different decision, or maybe a new owner came in, somebody new in charge making the decisions. They start saying, hey, we could save some money if we do this. We could save some money if we do that. They're not generating enough money, but they think they're going to solve their income problem by just reducing their expenses. And they start lowering their standards as a result. You go to the restaurant or the diner, this is specific to a diner that's in my head, where you used to go there, you used to have a great burger. Now you go there and it literally tastes like it just came out of a cellophane wrap box in the microwave. There's a point where a man will, in order to keep going, he will just reduce who he is. Because they're doing that over time, eventually their identity shrinks too. It doesn't shrink in some grand transition or movement or event. It's just gradual, right? One of the things that is used a lot nowadays is this term drift. Why do men drift? So I hate that term, right? And every once in a while, I'll leverage different headlines and things like that, and I'll see that drift is where other people would put that term there. I don't think it's drift, right? And I think that's, there's a reason why I don't like the word drift. It's not because there's something inherently wrong with the word. Show me on the doll where the word drift hurt you. It's really what happens with a man is he erodes. There is a decline in the form of decay. It's not that it's drifting, because that implies that its capability is the same. It's just redirecting, it's pivoting in a different direction. And that's not what happens at all. When a man stops expecting anything from themselves, it's because they've lowered standards because of an erosion, an inability to maintain who they were at that higher level of standards, just to be able to keep moving. At some point, and this will be a recurring theme, you'll see that some men will break eventually. But we're not talking about those men today. We're talking about the men that become bitter, resentful, and numb. Every time a man lowers his standard and he spends some time with that lower standard, he loses a little bit more respect, not only for himself, but he loses a little bit more respect for the man he was originally trying to be. When he starts losing respect for the man he was trying to be, because it's untenable, he can't sustain himself on the mission, that's where the bitterness starts to come in. That's where the resentfulness, the resentment starts coming in, right? So number 6, they stop expecting anything from themselves. Right. Comments. What we got here? Big Chad. Happy early Thanksgiving, you and yours. You too, brother, man. Good to see you. And you better keep fucking grinding, Chad. You know I'm watching those posts. My man lost like almost 70 pounds already, guys. Fucking crushing it. All right, let's get to the next one on the list. You got me excited there, Chad. Good to see you. All right, number 5. They try to outrun problems instead of confronting them. This one, I think, you guys could relate to. This could probably resonate with people, probably a little bit more easily, a little bit easier, more easily. You know what I mean? This is the scenario where the man, he gets busy. He takes on more work. He distracts himself with things that might actually produce pressure, but he can control the pressure. But every single time a man avoids confronting his issues, he shouldn't assume that happens just for free, that there's no cost to that. There's always going to be a cost for avoiding the work you're supposed to be doing. And what winds up happening is the things that they avoid wind up becoming the boogeymen under their beds, the boogeymen in the closets. It winds up scaring them into directions that are determined or chosen just because they avoid those issues. The things that they don't face, the things that they don't engage, winds up dominating who they are and the trajectory of their life. So there's a point where if you're avoiding the problems, see, and this is the thing, I'm somebody who, I've been through some shit in my life. I've done some shit in my life. I got plans for doing some more shit in my life. But one of the things that was a consistent, good times, bad times, on mission, off mission, was friction. There was always going to be friction. If you wind up avoiding the friction that's on the path that you're moving, you are defined then by a mission that by definition will keep you away from where you were trying to originally go. In my bumpy road model that I shared years ago, it was in my mission mastery program. There's the idea of you're going to stay on this road, and this is the direction I'm going to go. And there are all these obstacles I'm going to face. This is the friction. And in that program, I described it as bumps, hills, and mountains, just talking about the severity of the obstacles. And obviously, the bumps are easier to traverse than the mountains. But along with that, and if you could just go with the visual for a second, when there's a bump ahead of you on the road that's significant, let's call it a hill. Sure, it's going to be harder to get past that. But we also know that looking at it from the path, from the position on the path that we are, once we cross it, there's going to be things on the other side that we can't see from over here. So from the starting line of any mission, we can't see the things that are on the other side of the obstacles. In other words, the bigger obstacles we go through, the more we learn on the other side. It seems paradoxical, but I don't think it's a paradox at all. To me, it just makes sense. You earned the information, you've earned the experience, you've earned the wisdom. In the bumpy road model, I say, there are also pivots, but whenever we have the opportunity to pivot, it should always be because you've discovered based on this new information, there's actually more power this way. The argument then is, well, why would we not pivot? What if there isn't more power that way? And I would say the only time people pivot in a direction where there's no more power is because they're avoiding the pressure that they're currently engaging. And that speaks to what this point on the countdown list is. They try to outrun problems instead of confronting them, right? And they wind up never getting anywhere because every time they hit a significant, to them, level of pressure, they pivot and go a different direction, right? They spend their whole life running. So that's number 5. Couple of comments. Big D. What's homie? That's my brother, guys. My little brother, even though he's taller than me. Chat on it. 100-something days in and working. Right on. Fucking keep grinding. And by the way, Chad, if you don't have the results, I ain't giving you the fucking credit. So pressure to power, motherfucker. Right on. 100 days. Fucking awesome. Florian, what's up, Florian? He writes, thanks for this live stream to point 6. You don't so much stop burning for something. You stop keeping the flame because if you don't expect anything from yourself, why would there be a fire? You're absolutely right. In my pressure to power model, right, there is a whole infrastructure, right? And I have this thing I wrote, constructed called the meta model, and I just squirrel these things away. And one of the things speaking to that point, Florian, is a man has a vision. The vision has him see himself in a different state, in a different point of life, a different stage of development, but he sees the future him, we could say. Looking at who he is and then looking at the future him, there's a tension that he experiences. And that tension is the thing that winds up being converted into movement. So if you don't expect anything from yourself, as Florian put it here, why would you have a reason to move anywhere, right? And that's absolutely true. All right. So let's get back. Where are we at? What was I on? 5, 4? We are on 4. That's where we are. 4. So number 4, they let one area of their life bleed into others. Everybody here is familiar with this. Everybody here knows how this happens. My entire framework for the 3 roads is how we transmit our power into the world as men. And there is the self, there is the tribe or the relationships, the alliances, and then there's the value. How do we create? How do we make ourselves a good investment for other people? How do we develop who we are? Like these 3 roads, the reason why it's worth looking at them separately is because we understand that one can't fix the other one. But when you suffer in one, it bleeds over to the other ones. That's just how it is. Things suck at work, you're going to wind up getting grumpy around your wife. Conversely, your wife's being a bitch, you're going to wind up being a bitch at work to your coworkers, right? These things are connected. So in this number 4, we have the idea that, well, if you don't see your life as even having different areas, then how could you look or be sensitive to whether or not an issue in one area is bleeding into another? Well, this is very indicative of somebody who was on the cusp of becoming bitter, resentful, or numb. When they're at work and they're stressed, their home life suffers. when they neglect their physicality, right? The machine, I call it, their confidence starts to wane. That lack of confidence affects their ability to lead. It affects their ability to create. When one area of your life collapses, it is inevitably going to affect the other ones. Well, to this list, and speaking about these people, they see this happening and they let it happen. They see the struggles at home start to affect their work performance. And they don't say, no, I can't let this affect that, which eventually would have them confront the issues at home and deal with them. In other words, they more than likely, or more likely, validate it bleeding over. It becomes the narrative. Sort of, it's self-explanatory. Like, you were doing poorly at home and now you're doing poorly at work. Well, you can't let that happen. Well, of course I'm going to do poorly at work. I'm doing poorly at home. It's like you just said the same thing I did. But the people who this applies to, they don't see that it's an issue. There's a reason why in number 4 it says they let this thing happen. They don't look to stop it. It's not that they're blind to it, by the way. They see it happening, but don't think it's worth stopping. They don't see it as something significant. It's just inevitable. Well, of course, everything's being affected, as opposed to treating it as sort of a threshold of erosion where it's like, oh, no, I got to stop this. This is starting to affect my work, or vice versa, or any other, direction that this could be applied, right? So if everything, if one thing starts to fall apart and they allow that to sort of bleed in other areas, you wind up getting men that'll not only explain it away by saying, well, of course this is happening, but they'll also get to the point where they're saying, well, it's unstoppable. Well, of course this is happening. This is happening everywhere. I can't control it. And they start making themselves the victim. Well, what happens when they start identifying their circumstances as beyond their control and start labeling themselves a victim? They start becoming bitter. They start becoming resentful. And if it becomes too overwhelming for them, they start becoming numb, right? So number 4, they let one area of life bleed into the others. All right, let's keep moving. Where are we at? Number 3, they lose their vision of who they're becoming. So just before I started, I think it was, to Florian, I was describing how a man develops this vision because he was stimulated while engaging reality and got this idea, right? It always starts with like this idea. And there's this whole system that I'm not going to get into the details of, but functionally for our purposes, he's like, hey, wouldn't it be nice, or I should, or I think I'm gonna, however, he frames it, it's a future him he sees. That future him exists in a reality, the collective of all those things together, we call the vision. He has that vision and he goes, I'm going to become that guy. Missions, obviously the road between here to there. Well, in number 3, they lose that vision. Men are pretty tough. Men are resilient. A little bit of training, a little bit of luck. They could even be anti-fragile, right? The friction makes them stronger. But although they can endure almost anything, it has to be within the context of believing it's going to lead to somewhere. There has to be a reason, a purpose. But the problem is it becomes without purpose if the vision starts to blur, if it starts to fall out of sight at some point when somebody can't see the cause of them moving the way they're moving, they stop and they have to ask themselves, why am I doing all this? why is this even worth it? What's the point of this? Because they don't have that orienting context in the form of a vision. Without that vision, without the identity, everything falls apart. By everything, the movement first. It's like, I don't know where I'm going. You're hiking through the woods, right? I do a lot of hiking, a lot of woods analogies. I'm hiking through the woods and I have to get back to my car. But at some point, I forget where my car is. Or I forget I have a car, right? If I don't know that I'm supposed to go to my car and I don't know where it is, why should I be moving anywhere? It's sort of like the first thing I do is I stop moving because I could be moving in the wrong direction. That's what happens when a man loses vision. So you lose vision. They continue to sort of repeat to themselves, what's the point of this? Why am I doing it? And eventually you ask yourself that enough times, it starts to be a resentment for being exposed to it all. Why should I have to do this? Why, what's the point? Why, this is bullshit. I never signed up for this. I should, whatever the narrative winds up being, it's one of resentment. Why? Because they lost the vision of who they're becoming. So the context of all that friction, gone. Very hard to go through a struggle if you don't know why you're going through it. Without the vision, it's just struggle, right? Who the fuck just wants to struggle for the sake of struggling, right? That's like a fetish, I think, right? Certainly not a life goal. All right, comments. Aaron writes, somehow I missed your The Rock That Almost Dropped Me email until I saw it this morning. Talk about that one, Jamie. I know what it's like to learn those lessons on hikes. Yeah, a couple days ago, you guys, if you're not signed up for the email, you're missing some shit. I talked about being on a hike and slipping and busting my ass. There's a point where, when we rely on things with some sort of presumptive expectation, we have to have a system that can handle being wrong, right? You guys have heard me talk about Bayesian logic a lot, right? And this sort of Bayesian filter that I put on my decision matrix. It's all right. Is new information going to debunk my position? New information should inform my position. It should evolve my position. It might correct, or reorient my position, but it should never debunk it. I never want to have a complete position based on incomplete information is how I usually put it out there. But the value of it is, and the analogy I used with that hiking experience, I went to step on a rock while crossing a creek, and one of the rocks wasn't as stable as I thought it was. Right. And I wound up with a wet spot, like I was peeing my pants like a toddler for the rest of the hike. I don't think I ran into anybody though. So it was good. So the idea of it is, we want to build a relationship with the world that at no point, despite our mastery of our movement, at no point becomes tyrannical in its expectations or inaccurate. I don't have to put tyrannical. I could just say inaccurate, right? You've never met somebody that knows as much as a adolescent who's discovered their voice, right? I've got a couple of teenagers in my house, and man, it's like you think they have all the secrets of the universe between the group of them. As my father used to say, so smart, you're stupid. It certainly applies to them at this point. Faithful Tribe, best to you, my friend. Good to see you. All right, so number 3, they lose vision of who they're becoming. Okay, we got 2 more. Number 2, they break their own word too many times. Now, this is not what you think. Obviously, your reputation will suffer if you write checks that you can't cash, figuratively speaking. But that's not what I'm getting at with this particular point on the list, this number 2. I'm talking about the little betrayals that an individual makes to himself. It's the internal betrayals. I'm going to do this thing, they say to themselves, and then they don't do it. It's not public, it's private. Nobody might even know about it. But what winds up happening is a skipped workout here, or a let's say I'm going to go on a hike and I don't wind up going. Let's say I'm going to promise to do this thing for somebody and I wind up not doing it for whatever reason. Maybe it's I'm avoiding something that I committed myself to. Whatever the case is, however it manifests, it's really me making the case that I can't even trust myself to do things. We have to trust ourselves internally to be able to follow our own words to ourselves. If we say, I don't know if it was a video I made the other day or an email, but I said, a leader has to learn how to be a follower first. The reason is when he knows how to follow, he understands what the world looks like to the people he's leading. And one thing that any leader knows is that followers are not going to follow them if they can't trust them. Well, what's to be said then for an individual who can't even trust himself? He literally refuses or loses his ability to trust his own leadership for his own life. What winds up happening is there's that internal contradiction that is just carried day in and day out. And eventually, the ability to sustain the identity cracks. Once that happens, bitterness, resentment, numbness. Why? Because they need to project the blame outside because they cannot bear the responsibility of it themselves. So number 2, they break their own word too many times. All right, we got one more. And this is the number 1 way that good men turn bitter, resentful, and numb. Let's do a recount real quick. So we had number 7, they carry more than they can say. Number 6, they stop expecting anything from themselves. Number 5, they try to outrun problems instead of confronting them. Number 4, they let one area of life bleed into the others. Number 3, they lose their vision of who they're becoming. Number 2, they break their own word too many times. And the number 1 way that good men turn bitter, resentful, and numb, they stop feeling because feeling hurts. When we become numb, it's important to understand numbness is not weakness. Numbness is, remember earlier I talked about the OODA loop of when you are overwhelmed, you will reduce the map that you are going to use to orient yourself. Numbness is the final sort of identity level defense mechanism. There's a reason why men shut down, and despite men wanting to think it was a different reason, it's the same reason that kids shut down. They shut down to be functional. They shut down because they lose the trust in their movement. If every single time you feel something, feeling is an investment you are making. When you feel something, you have to first open yourself up to the opportunity / vulnerability that results in feeling something. Of course, it's an investment in most cases where we feel and then we get something back exponentially more valuable. It's why we do it in the first place. But imagine you have a house that has a door, and every time you open the door, somebody comes in and hurts you and your family. At some point, you're going to say, I got to stop opening this door. Even though it doesn't make any sense, you're not thinking at that scale of context at that moment. You're saying, I just can't open this door because every time I open it, somebody comes in and hurts me and my family. So even though they shut down in order to remain functional, just like children, what's the price of being numb? The price of it is they lose access to that drive we were talking about earlier, right? The tension that creates movement. They lose access to the clarity that being connected to the environment can provide a person. They obviously then would lose the direction. Where if I don't know what's going on, how do I know where I'm supposed to go? Another cost of being numb, you also lose connection to the people that may help you move. That's what numbness does. You become apathetic, disconnected. It's hard to reach people like that. Right? Eventually, what happens with numbness, it starts to be this nihilism, this apathy, this what's the point of it all? How could that not be understood to be further down on that road? If you're somebody who can't generate the willpower to move, then chances are, you have to revisit your understanding of what life is supposed to be, of who you are, of the point, the purpose of moving forward. Obviously, I'm somebody who, movement is mandatory. I've been putting out that phrase for a couple of years now. And when I first did, everybody thought it was just like physical. It certainly applies to the physical, but this is so much bigger than the physical. If you don't move, you decay, you erode. So it's a very easy thing. If you're in a situation where you can't find yourself to move, you can't find that purpose for movement, then you have to get that back online. The narrative is not as important as the functional assessment of you not moving. That's what's more important. If somebody's choking on something and they're coming up to you and they're making, the universal choking sound and they're making all the sounds and everything, you don't go, please somebody tell me, what is he eating? What did he eat? He was eating lunch. What was he having a sandwich? What kind of sandwich? Like at some point, it's like, are you going to fucking help the guy or not? When you're not moving, the reason you're not moving is, I'm not saying it's not important, mind you. I'm saying it's not as important as moving, right? So if you're somebody who's in a situation where that numbness is starting to affect you, understand bitterness, apathy, nihilism, all these things are just a hop, skip, and a jump on the way. Hop, skip, and jump away. You know what I mean? All right. So we have that whole list. I added a little bit of context in the beginning. Let me bring this off. And I said, not all these things are going to resonate with you. Not all these things are you going to be able to connect to in a way where it's like, oh, I didn't realize that. Or, this is supposed to be links on a chain that everybody, goes through these things as stages that are linear in design and expectation. Not the case at all. The thing is, though, that these are a bunch of reasons that I've been coaching men over 20 years. These are the things that lead to those states. In the beginning, I'm not going to go over it again, but I talked about why being bitter, resentful, or numb is not going to help you, right? It's the exact opposite of what a man should be generating in his formulas from day to day to be. He doesn't want to be bitter. He wants to be grateful. He doesn't want to be resentful. He wants to be ambitious or maybe appreciative, he doesn't want to be numb. He wants to be receptive, right? He wants to be connected. He wants to be aware. The exact opposite. Why? Because one produces movement. The other one produces stagnation and therefore erosion. But when men are declining, in their state and they start to erode, a lot of times they don't even see it happening until they're already there. The hardest part is for the individual to identify when that happens. Sometimes, and you guys have heard me say this before, we need to have people we trust to be able to call us on our bullshit, to say, hey, you said you're going to do those things, you haven't been doing them. Or, hey, I noticed you're a little off. Like, what's going on? What can I do for you? Or maybe not something as, analytic as that. Maybe it's like, I noticed one of my boys is dragging his ass, and I call him like, hey, let's go on a hike this weekend. Or, hey, you want to go lift? Or whatever the case is. Or internally, I see that I'm in a bad state. I should go do something. Like, shit, I can't fucking tell you how many times. Like, I am aggravated. I want to put my hand through the screen. Like, understand, as a side note, I created all these formulas and these models just to be able to more effectively navigate my own life. I also happen to get effective at turning them into formulas that are transferable to other people. But everything I talk about is something that I had to fuck up significantly at some point. So I am by no means a master of not making mistakes. That's just not the way it works. That being said, I was just reminded by that little diatribe by the very regular occurrence of me wanting to put my hand through my computer monitor, and I go, you know what? Time for a hike. Time for a walk. Time for, check in with the family. I got to get up and move. I got to do something. And whatever's frustrating me is never as significant or important as what it is that I need to do to make sure my state is high and I'm connected to vision and mission. So I hope that makes sense. Speaking about, this entire topic and the points that I've made, especially these last points with, being aware, I think you guys have seen at this point, I've been putting it everywhere, that I have an assessment. It's called the Leadership Alignment Assessment. It takes a couple of minutes. I think the average time I just checked was 2 minutes, 46 seconds, I think is the average time that people are completing it. I've had over 1,000 men visit the page already. Women, you're allowed to, by the way. You don't have to say a man's name either. Like, it's not that serious. But it's a 15-question quiz, and you fill it out, and you get results. The results are based on your actual answers. And I spent a lot of time before releasing this to the public designing the logic to make sure that you do get effective responses. I've got a lot of incredible feedback from people as a result of it. Obviously, I coach men. I have groups. I do one-on-one coaching. I help entrepreneurs, a bunch of things that I do. And this is yet another way that I could offer value, because some of the people that do it are going to go, you know what? I want to continue training this stuff with MC. But this isn't a trick. It is absolutely just, I think, a tool that you guys could use. The links in the description should be in the description, whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube. But you should check it out. It's free, no commitment. I don't share emails, sell email. I don't do any of that bullshit. So that's not something you have to worry about with me. But I do think that everybody would stand to benefit from getting that information, right? It's feedback and assessment of what's going on in your own life. So check that out. Links in the description. All right, let's call it there. Where are we at? Oh, man, almost an hour on the dot. I was moving. I appreciate you guys hanging out with me. Like, this shit ain't easy sometimes. I'm up real early. I'm working this whole time. I got stuff to do after this. I'm going to try and get in the woods later. Let's see how that works. But every time you guys show up and participate in these things with me, it gives me some fire to keep going. And I appreciate the comments, feedback, etc. Make sure you like, subscribe, do all those different things. The comments that you put usually go on the chat. If you want, you can put a comment on a regular page for the video afterwards. Helps the algorithm, blah, blah, blah. You guys know the deal. I appreciate you all. I know you're busy hanging out with me on a Wednesday afternoon, day before Thanksgiving, right? So that's another thing. Have a good Thanksgiving. A few guys that are American and normal, I guess. I don't fucking know. If you celebrate Thanksgiving, if you celebrate Indigenous People Day, don't ever watch another one of my videos. I ain't got nothing for you, because you're a whiny, victim-minded little bitch. But aside from that, I wish everybody the best. I'll see you guys next week, same time. And as always, brothers and sisters, pressure to power.